Hello, I'm Emily. Before I dive into my story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that turn the everyday grind into something extraordinary. Now let's get into it. Life as a single mom and a full-time software engineer is anything but easy. My 4-year-old son Jack is full of energy and curiosity, usually spending his days at daycare while I juggle code at a busy tech firm downtown. But life threw me a curveball last month when my mom, the rock who helps me hold it all together, fell seriously ill. With no daycare, no backup babysitters, and deadlines piling up, I had no choice but to bring Jack to the office. On our first day navigating the corporate world together, I packed a bag with all of Jack's essentials: crayons, his favorite picture books, and an iPad loaded with silent mode games. I explained to Jack how important it was for him to stay quiet, turning it into a game. He nodded, wide-eyed, taking on the mission with the seriousness of a tiny spy. We arrived early, the office still quiet, the lights dimmed in that pre-coffee hush. My cubicle became our little fortress. I set up a small area on the floor with his toys and snacks, hoping he'd stay entertained without a peep. As my coworkers trickled in, their reactions were a mix of surprise and amusement. I shot them nervous smiles, finger to my lips, pleading for understanding without words. Most just nodded and went about their day, but not my boss, Mr. Johnson. When Mr. Johnson spotted Jack, his eyebrows shot up. "Bringing the whole family today, Emily?" His tone held a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just for today, Mr. Johnson. My mom's sick, and I had no one to watch Jack. He'll be quiet, I promise," I said, trying to sound confident. Mr. Johnson pursed his lips, glancing down at Jack, who was busy coloring. "Well, make sure he is. We've got a full day, and I need everyone at 100%. Understood." "We won't be a disturbance," I assured him, though the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. The morning passed in a blur of meetings via headphones and quiet games. Jack was a champ, whispering questions and munching on snacks. But by midday, restlessness set in. During a team video call, Jack began to fidget, the quiet game no longer as thrilling. I was presenting a new software patch, screen shared, when I heard a slight spilling sound. Turning, I saw Jack's water bottle tipped over, a puddle inching towards Mr. Johnson's office door, just a few feet away. "Oops, mommy water," Jack whispered, his horror mirroring mine. I hastily muted myself and darted up with tissues in hand, but not before Mr. Johnson appeared in his doorway, a dark shadow looming as he watched the spill creeping towards his leather shoes. "Really, Emily? This is a workplace, not a playground," he snapped. I scrambled on the floor, dabbing at the water. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Johnson. We're cleaning it up right now. It won't happen again." But what happened next shocked me. Mr. Johnson, his patience clearly worn thin, reached out and slapped Jack's cheek. I froze for a millisecond, shock rooting me to the spot. Then maternal instinct kicked in. I stood swiftly, wet paper towels dropping from my hands, and rushed to Jack, sweeping him up into my arms. He buried his face in my shoulder, sobbing, his small body trembling. I turned to face Mr. Johnson, who looked back at me with a mix of defiance and irritation. A cold fury settled over me. "You get my son. You actually hit him," I said, my voice low, struggling to keep it steady. "He needs to learn not to mess with other people's things," Mr. Johnson replied, unapologetic. "That gives you no right to touch him, ever," I countered, holding Jack close. Around us, the office had gone quiet, my colleagues peeking over their cubicles, drawn by the commotion. "I'm calling HR about this right now," I declared, my decision firm. Ignoring Mr. Johnson's scoff, I headed straight to the HR office, Jack still in my arms, his cries now soft whimpers. The HR manager, Ms. Watkins, looked up in surprise as I entered her office, Jack's face still buried against me. "Emily, what happened?" she asked, concern creasing her brow as she noticed Jack's distress. I set Jack down gently and explained. Mr. Johnson hit Jack. He spilled some water by accident, and Mr. Johnson slapped him. The words tasted bitter, almost unbelievable as they left my mouth. Ms. Watkins' eyes widened. "Oh no, that's not acceptable at all. Let me document this, and we'll start an immediate investigation. Can you write down everything that happened? And we'll need to take photos of Jack's cheek." The rest of the day was a blur of written statements, whispered apologies from sympathetic coworkers, and the cold, hard process of filing a formal complaint. Jack clung to me, quieter than I'd ever seen him, his small world shattered by the harshness of an adult's anger. Once we were back at my cubicle, I pulled out my phone and gently turned Jack's face toward the light. "Sweetie, I just need to take a picture, okay? It's important," I murmured, snapping a few photos of the red mark on his cheek. These would be crucial for the report to HR. Next, I scanned the office floor, my eyes meeting those of a few colleagues who had witnessed the incident scene. I approached each colleague one by one, starting with Ella, who had been closest to the scene. "Ella, could you please help me document what happened for HR?" I asked. She nodded immediately, her face a mix of concern and anger. "Of course, Emily. It was completely out of line," Ella responded, her voice low but firm. She quickly wrote down her account, detailing how Mr. Johnson had struck Jack without any provocation other than the spilled water. I gathered similar testimonies from two other colleagues, Tom and Mira, who also expressed their disbelief and willingness to support my complaint. With the statements and photos secured, I felt a grim satisfaction. There was enough evidence to make a solid case against Mr. Johnson. Holding Jack's hand, we returned to Ms. Watkins' office in HR. "I have statements from witnesses and photos of the injury," I said as I handed over the evidence. Ms. Watkins took them, her expression growing increasingly serious. "This is very serious, Emily. We'll need to conduct a formal investigation. It's clear this is not just a minor incident," she stated, her voice resolute. She assured me that they would handle the situation with the seriousness it warranted. "Thank you, Ms. Watkins. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to any other child, or anyone for that matter," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "We absolutely agree. This is not the kind of behavior we condone or allow in our workplace," she replied, her tone reassuring. The next steps involved formal interviews with the witnesses and a detailed report being filed against Mr. Johnson. The company moved quickly, likely due to the nature of the offense and the clear evidence presented. Mr. Johnson was called into a separate meeting with upper management, and while I wasn't privy to the details, the swift scheduling suggested they were taking it seriously. That evening, as Jack and I headed home, I felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious relief. The immediate response from HR gave me hope that justice would be served. Still, the incident had left a mark far deeper than the one on Jack's cheek, a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities and fierce protective instincts that come with motherhood. Jack held my hand tightly as we walked to the car, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mommy, are you mad at me for the water?" he asked, his words tentative. I squeezed his hand gently, bending down to meet his gaze. "Oh honey, no, I'm not mad at you at all. You didn't do anything wrong," I reassured him, my heart aching at the thought that he might blame himself. As the days following the incident blurred together, the tension at the office was palpable. HR's initial hesitation, due to Mr. Johnson's senior position, was a bitter pill to swallow. My discussions with Ms. Watkins were marked by a careful, almost guarded tone, reflecting the complexities of challenging someone who had shaped company policies for years. Despite the gravity of what had happened, there were murmurs that it might be swept under the rug, that Mr. Johnson's influence would overshadow the clear evidence of his misconduct. My anxiety grew, not just for Jack's well-being but for what failing to address this incident might say about our workplace culture. However, the tide began to turn as more colleagues came forward, not just as witnesses but as supporters, voicing their discontent over Mr. Johnson's behavior, which, as it turned out, had been oppressive in more ways than one. The whispers of his temper and harshness were no longer just whispers, they were spoken aloud, contributing to a collective call for action. Mira, who had been with the company for several years, shared her own experiences during a meeting with HR. "It's not just about this incident. There's a pattern of intimidation here that we've all been too afraid to talk about," she said firmly, her declaration opening the door for others to share similar stories. Faced with this wave of testimonials and the undeniable evidence of the injury to Jack, HR was compelled to launch a full investigation. They brought in an external firm to ensure impartiality, interviewing everyone involved and examining the documentation I had provided. The investigation was thorough and, to my relief, concluded swiftly. The findings were undeniable. Mr. Johnson had acted in a manner unbecoming of his position, and striking a child was the final, irrevocable breach of conduct. When the decision was finally announced, it was a somber victory. Mr. Johnson was terminated for child abuse, a move that sent shockwaves through the company. The news was met with mixed reactions, relief from those who had suffered under his leadership, and shock from others who had only seen his polished exterior. Following the resolution, the company's executive team held a meeting with all employees. They expressed regret over the incident and outlined steps to prevent such occurrences in the future, including more stringent checks on managerial conduct and enhanced support systems for working parents. They offered me time off to recover from the ordeal and assistance in finding childcare. Recognizing the dual strain of managing a career and motherhood, especially under such extraordinary circumstances. As I sat with Jack at a park later that day, watching him play, his laughter a balm to the recent turmoil, I reflected on the ordeal. The company had stepped up in the end, but the journey highlighted the need for constant vigilance and advocacy, not just for one's child, but for one's rights as an employee. "Mommy, look how high I can swing," Jack called out, his cheeks flushed with joy. I smiled, pushing him gently higher and higher. "You're touching the sky, Jack." As he swung, carefree and soaring, I felt a resolve firm within me, not just to find a more supportive work environment, but to ensure that such a situation would never be repeated, at least not on my watch. Each day, as I watched Jack rediscover his usual cheerful demeanor and witnessed my mother regain her strength, the priorities I had often sidelined in the rush of daily life came sharply into focus. The need for a supportive, understanding work environment where family emergencies wouldn't be met with hostility but with compassion became my guiding criterion for future employment. Armed with new resolve, I began the search for a job that would respect and align with my values. It wasn't just about finding a place that tolerated having children around in emergencies. It was about finding a place that embraced the reality of working parents, acknowledging that life and work are not separate entities, but intertwined threads of the same fabric. During my search, I came across a tech startup known for its innovative approach, not only to technology but also to workplace culture. Their policies actively supported work-life balance, offering flexible working hours, remote work options, and an on-site childcare facility. It seemed almost too good to be true. I reached out with my application and soon found myself in interviews that felt more like conversations, discussing projects and policies with people who genuinely seemed to care about their employees' well-being. The contrast with my previous job was stark, and every interaction left me more hopeful. When the job offer came, it was not just an offer to join their team, but an invitation to join a community committed to supporting each other. Accepting it felt like the right step, not just for my career, but for my family. Starting at the new company was a breath of fresh air. My first day coincided with a company-wide picnic, an event that welcomed families and celebrated the community. Watching Jack play with other children on the company grounds, I knew I had made the right decision. "Mommy, can we come here every day?" Jack asked, his eyes wide with excitement as he took a break from a spirited game of tag. Laughing, I nodded, ruffling his hair. "Yes, sweetie, we can." As I looked around at my new colleagues, many of whom were also there with their families, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The transition from a toxic work environment to one that prioritized employee well-being had been fraught with challenges, but it was worth every effort. The experience had taught me the importance of standing up for what is right, not only for myself but for Jack, and for those who might one day find themselves in similar situations. As Jack ran back to his new friends, his laughter ringing through the air, I was filled with optimism for the future. Here, at this company, our prospects seemed as bright as the clear sky above us. And that wraps up our story. What do you think about workplaces and their support for working parents? Should companies be required to provide more family-friendly policies, or is it solely a personal responsibility to manage work-life balance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions really help enrich our discussions. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to you. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to hear what you think.